So I made a list. I made a list of a bunch of the things that a CTO or any type of tech executive should never do, because I keep seeing these things pop up in the news all the time. And I thought it would be an interesting topic to cover. So I'm Josh. I'm a software exec and former CTO with 2 decades of experience in the software industry. And on this channel, we go inside and crack open the secrets of the software industry. So to kick things off, I'm going to go right into the first topic, which is writing production code. And that means anything, building anything that's going to be in front of your customers, right? And this is something that I don't think any CTO, any executive, any VP should be doing. I don't mean things that go in front of your shareholders or your investors, right? Things that are demoing new technologies or putting together a mock-up of a new interface, things like that. That's fine. Technology, though, that's going to be going in front of your customers, things that your entire base are going to be using, those aren't things that your CTO should be writing. Mainly it's because, as a CTO, as an executive, that person already has people on their team, people that they hired specifically to do those kinds of things, right? People who are better at it than them, people who are faster at it than them. And so that code, it's going to be better. Plus, if you're writing code as a VP, for instance, and you are then passing that along to your QA engineers, to your software engineers, that dynamic is very different than the dynamic of it going through your product team, your project managers, and getting feedback through that way. Effectively, what you're saying is, I'm giving you this code. I'm also paying you your salary and signing off on your paychecks. And now you're going to have to tell me why my code is complete crap. It's not a good dynamic to set into place. It's not a good standard. It's not a good precedent to set. It's not a good precedent to set. Always ends up being a disaster. And it's a disaster that only can get blamed on the CTO and the kinds of people who tend to have, for lack of a better word, the ego to want to put their own code in production as the leader of a company or as the leader of a department, are the people who tend to deal really poorly with that kind of negative feedback when their code ends up breaking everything. Which actually brings me to the second point on my list, and I didn't plan it this way, blaming their team. This is something that you've probably seen happen in any company, in any field. You've probably seen managers and VPs and executives blame their teams when things go badly. And this is, I think, the single biggest no-no, the single biggest bad thing that you can do as a manager, as a leader, is blaming your team. Because one of the biggest things, in a way, one of the biggest things that you're paid for, one of the biggest mental loads and mental stresses on an executive, especially in the tech industry, is that you have to effectively take responsibility when anything goes wrong, but you also have to be ready to give credit to the other people when things go well, when things are done correctly, right? So if, say, you are VP of custom software, you've got a big release that goes out and something goes wrong, the system goes down, it's on you, not on your team, to take that responsibility. Because at the end of the day, this responsibility all rolls up to you. I know there's a saying, it all rolls downhill, okay? But really that's not true, because you're the one who built the team as the executive, right? You're the one who hired or was in charge of the hiring process for those people. You're the one who put together the team dynamics and the checks and balances in place to make these things work. So really, it's on the executive to make sure it goes well. So when it doesn't, it's also on the executive to take responsibility for that, to do a root cause analysis, to tell people why it went bad, and to work on fixing it. On the flip side of that, say it goes well. It's a huge success. Customers love it. Brings a lot of new income, right? All those things are things that you need to pass the credit along, pass the responsibility along to the rest of your team, right? If there's a specific team, specific set of people, here's the project manager, here's the senior engineer in charge of it, here's the team that was in charge of running this, here's the QA people who did the QA on this, here's the marketing people who did the marketing stuff for it. Those are the people who need to get the credit passed to them, because that visibility is really, really important, especially to building a positive environment, a positive and successfully working and functioning team, right? People know that you're in charge. People know that you're the one that, as the executive, who is the one passing that credit along. They know that it was part of your department. You don't need to sit there and say, I did this, I did such a great job, here's all the great things that you did, right? It's on you to pass that responsibility along, right? And so that's the difficult position that you can kind of be put in, right? Because on one hand, you have to take on all the bad, but you have to pass through all of the good. And a lot of people who get into that position aren't capable of doing that. Again, it's that ego trip, right? They want to take on all the good and pass along all the bad, but that doesn't work. It never works out when you try to do that, right? If you try to blame your team, all you're doing is blaming yourself. Because you say, that release goes badly, right? You pass along the lead and say, oh, this engineer did this thing badly. This one did this thing. They didn't test this right. All you're doing is saying, I hired the wrong people. I set up the wrong team dynamics. I'm a bad leader. That's all you're doing when you're trying to pass the blame along to your team. And, that's something that a lot of, the kind of people who you're communicating to as an executive, which is oftentimes venture capital or private equity, your ownership, your leadership, or even shareholders, they see through that. And that's a known thing, right? Everyone knows what you're trying to do there. And that's why a lot of the people who will try to pass the blame instead shift to passing the blame to other departments instead of their own team. Right? Something goes wrong, they don't want to take responsibility. They'll say, "Oh, this was marketing's fault. They didn't market our project well. This was QA's fault. They were unable to. They didn't know how to test the project. They failed there. This was, whatever. The product was a bad fit." But they're not willing to take responsibility for the fact that, well, we actually just did a really bad job implementing this. It's also a real big green flag when you see that happen, is when you see a department leader, head of something, a CTO of a big company out there, put out a statement saying, hey, yeah, we messed up. We messed up on this. Here's why. Here's what we're doing to fix it, and not trying to pass the blame along the entire way. And it's not something you see very often. And speaking of things that you don't see very often, here's another one that I've used to see come up more. It's not as popular now. They're trying to be Don Draper. Why did I write this down? Because a lot of, well, I won't say a lot. There's this vision of an executive, right? This whining and dining the customers, the clients, the venture capital, the private equity, the ownership, whatever it is, what you have, whatever they're doing. The jet setting all over the place kind of executive that you might have in mind, and that maybe that still exists sometimes in the finance world. But in general, these guys, the guys who still who see themselves in that way, they're the kind of people who get fired for cause. And I don't mean that in the just the harassment way, but a lot of things have changed since that type of executive was in play. Mainly a lot of laws and company policies around what you are and what you aren't allowed to do, specifically when dealing with customers and when dealing with shareholders and stakeholders. Even things like being allowed to buy prospects dinner, right, as a marketing tactic. That's something that's not allowed in a lot of companies anymore. But yeah, so when you see somebody acting that way, that's definitely kind of a major red flag. For many ways. Like I said, there's the harassment aspect too, but generally speaking, they tend to walk the line of valid company policy, and that's not something that you want to be doing. And finally, the last one that I have written down here is this kind of this push, hustle mentality, the live the company mindset that you see in a lot of startups, but you also see in big companies these days too. Elon Musk is a really good example of this, and this might be a little bit of a controversial one, because I know this is really, it's a popular mindset, especially on like the LinkedIn crowd. There's a whole subreddit dedicated called LinkedIn Lunatics, which is kind of referring to this mindset. But specifically, I'm calling it out for the lead by example type of thing. And to me, specifically, one of the most important things for your employees is work-life balance. If you try to wring every single ounce out of your employee as a manager, you're going to get burnout and a lot of churn. You're going to have places like a lot of these Silicon Valley places where you've got your average tenure for software people being a few months, right? And you don't want that, because between onboarding and everything, you're not getting a lot out of them. Work-life balance is really important. And as people get to the executive levels, especially up to like the CTO levels, they tend to have this really live the company mentality, living, breathing, only, just all the time, focusing on the company. And you might think, yeah, that's a good thing, but really your employees do tend to mirror what you do. And so you really need to set a good working example, leading by example. Take the time off for family. take the time off that you need for mental health, right? Because if you don't do it, they're not going to do it. And if they're not taking the time off that is part of their contract that they're perfectly allowed to take, right, for mental well-being, physical well-being, for family, things like that, what's going to end up happening is you have a workforce that gets burned out constantly, that's constantly churning. You're constantly have to hire new people. And hiring new people is difficult because there's a fairly long onboarding process, to be quite frank, with almost any role in the engineering industry, whether it's software engineering or robotics. The things that your company, that any specific company is working on, is very specific to them. Even proprietary sometimes. And so people have to come in and they have to learn those systems. They have to learn the teams that they're working with. It takes time to get somebody set up and functioning at their best, highest capacity. It could be several months sometimes, right? So if you have employees burning out after 9 months, you're really only getting 6 months work out of that, and that's not a good way to be. And it's not a good, healthy work environment either. So that's one of the other major red flags that I see and that I would consider a red flag in a lot of executives and CTOs and things like that, especially when they're putting out statements on behalf of their company. Maybe some companies it works for. Some companies, these kind of like rock star cult of personality companies like SpaceX, that's the kind of thing that can drive them. But for most companies out there, this is a major, major red flag and a warning for employees not to look for a job at that company. So again, major, major red flag for a CTO or a tech executive to be exhibiting that kind of behavior. So those are my top 4 red flags for things that a CTO or a tech executive should never, ever be doing. I was going to do 5. But I didn't. I did 4 instead. So I hope you like that list. Tell me if you agree, if you disagree in the comments, what you think of that list. I'm sure some of it might be a little bit controversial. I think a lot of it makes sense. I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. Let me know. And if you like this kind of content, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and keep stopping by because there'll be more like this coming really soon.